Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining this session where we'll be talking about security in collective work. Before we begin, I would like us to ask ourselves the question: what does collective security mean to us? Now, moving on, we're going to understand what the meaning of security as a culture is. Security as a culture isn't about fear, it's about resilience. It's the foundation that lets us keep doing our work together over time. When people hear the word security, many immediately think of surveillance, police violence, digital threats, or repression. These are real and urgent, but if we only think about security in terms of reacting to harm, then we miss a deeper opportunity. Security as a culture goes beyond this. It means creating practices that prevent internal and external harm, because a lot of times this harm comes from within our spaces as well. Security as a culture supports resilience before crises emerge. It means we embed safety into our group values, daily behaviors, and relationships. The culture is built through repeated actions. For example, how we check in on each other, how we make decisions, how we deal with conflicts, and how we care for those most at risk. It's not something one person leads, it's something the whole group carries. Because in our groups, we are only as secure as the least secure one of us. Rather than thinking of security as something reactive or technical, we're going to reflect on how we build safety and care into the DNA of how we work together. We're going to move on to looking at the reactive versus the proactive part of security. We'll look at crisis response versus prevention, which falls under the reactive security. In the reactive approach, we respond after a security incident has occurred. For example, consider, say, a high profile case in 2021 where several activists' phones were found to be infected with Pegasus spyware. Once discovered, organizations rushed to secure affected devices and support those targeted. But by then, sensitive data may already have been compromised. That's what we look term as reactive security. But in contrast, a proactive model emphasizes prevention. Before any threat emerges, steps are already in place. Legal support is prearranged. Encrypted communication platforms are standard. Meeting locations are vetted for safety. And team members are trained in what to do if approached by authorities. For example, some grassroots organizations have adopted regular security audits every quarter, helping them identify weak points before these become vulnerabilities. In a reactive model, we wait for a problem, like a raid or arrest, then we scramble to support the affected persons. In a proactive model, we plan legal support ahead of time. We plan safe meeting locations ahead of time. Or, for example, we even prepare body systems before we need them when it comes to, say, actions. If we look at individual versus collective responsibility, in many teams, especially under pressure, security becomes reactive, falling on one or two people to handle everything. It might be the most tech savvy person who's expected to respond to a digital breach, or the team leader who deals with physical threats or legal risks, even if they are already stretched thin. But security shouldn't be one person's job. Holistic security means thinking beyond just digital threats, for example. It includes physical safety, legal protections, and psychosocial well being. And most importantly, it works best when it's shared. A proactive collective approach helps teams stay resilient. For example, some human rights organizations now include holistic security in their onboarding processes for new employees, which include, for example, basic digital hygiene like password management, planning for physical safety during fieldwork or protest, mental health check ins and stress management tools, knowing when and how to get local support. Now, when everyone understands the basics, the team is stronger. We don't have to be experts in everything, but we should know enough to look out for ourselves and our teammates. The bottom line, we're talking about a shift from isolated last minute actions to collective ongoing preparedness. Building this culture doesn't just reduce risk, it builds trust and resilience within the group. Now that we have seen the difference between reacting to crises and preparing for them, let's zoom in on what a real security culture looks like. Because this isn't just about tools or rules, it's about how we relate to each other as a team or a community. The first thing that we'll look at as an element of a security culture is shared agreements. First, we need shared agreements, agreed upon behaviors that everyone understands and practices. For example, something as simple as not taking or sharing photos at events without permission is a small but powerful norm that protects people. Others might include always using secure messaging apps like Signal for group chats or storing sensitive files in shared encrypted drives rather than someone's personal laptop. These norms take the pressure off individuals to guess what's okay. The second element is open communication. A healthy security culture is built on open communication. What is open communication? Open communication means people feel safe to speak up when something doesn't feel right, whether it's a suspicious email, a potential threat, or just a gut feeling. But that kind of openness doesn't happen by accident. It is built intentionally through trust, inclusion, and clear processes. Now, let's look at a few practical ways on how to build open communication in our teams. The first thing is to normalize speaking up early. How do we do this? We can create a culture where people are encouraged to flag concerns even if they are unsure. The second thing is to create regular low stake check ins. This includes security and well-being as standard topics in regular team meetings. This makes security part of everyday conversations, not just something discussed in a crisis. The third practical way on how to build open communication is by using inclusive and respectful language. We need to avoid blame or shame when discussing mistakes or near misses. We need to focus on learning, not punishment. For example, instead of asking who clicked the link, we could try to say, how can we improve how we spot phishing emails? The fourth practical way on how to build open communication is to make it clear how and where to report issues, whether it's through a shared chat channel, an anonymous form, or a trusted point of contact. People need simple, accessible ways to raise concerns. The fifth practical way on how to build communication is to lead by example. When team leaders or peers share their own vulnerabilities, like admitting they missed an update or needed help maintaining burnout, it sends a powerful message. We don't have to be perfect to be part of the team's security. The final practical way on how to build open communication is by recognizing and appreciating openness. Publicly but respectfully thank people who raise concerns. This reinforces that speaking up is valued and helps keep everyone safer. The third element for a security culture is collective care. Collective care is the emotional heart of security culture. For example, if everyone in the team keeps to the digital security norms, it is a form of collective care as we are all ensuring that we are keeping each other safe. Check-ins, mental health support, covering for each other during stress or absence, all of these reinforce the idea that our safety is shared, it's not solo. These three elements, shared norms, open communication, and collective care, don't work in isolation. They overlap and reinforce each other. That's why we have shown them in a Venn diagram. The stronger the overlap, the stronger your culture. So it's not just about having protocols, it's about building relationships that sustain those protocols. A strong security culture values people over productivity and believes that care is resistance. Now, we are going to be looking at the security culture, which is equal to long term resilience. The first thing will be reframing what security means. So far, we've talked about shifting from reactive to proactive security and building a culture grounded in agreement, communication, and care. But I would like to step back and remind us why this matters. Ultimately, building a culture of security isn't just about avoiding harm. It's not just about stopping doxing, preventing burnout, or locking down devices. It's about protecting something much bigger, our capacity to continue our crucial work, show up for each other, and even sustain the work we do over time. Now, we'll talk about emphasizing collective sustainability. Movements, teams, and communities don't burn out because they face pressure. They burn out when they face pressure alone without support structures in place. As such, a security culture is part of how we build long term resilience. It keeps us from collapsing under the weight of crisis. It allows us to bounce back, to regroup, and to keep moving. This is what sustainable activism looks like. Not just brave, but supported. Not just reactive, but resilient. A culture of security is what keeps people coming back. It helps people feel safe, trusted, supported, even when external conditions are unstable. Without a strong culture, groups often rely on individuals who eventually burn out. Or worse so, they miss key risks entirely because no one feels empowered to speak up. Culture is invisible until it is tested, and that's why we must build it intentionally. Now, the next thing we'll look at is power dynamics in activist spaces. We've talked about security culture as collective resilience, but to really make that work, we have to look at power because if we ignore power, we risk building safety and security only for the most privileged in our spaces. Every group has power dynamics, spoken or unspoken, and we have to acknowledge that this is a natural phenomenon. They shape who feels safe to speak, whose labor is invisible, and who shoulders the greatest risks. Why does power dynamics in our spaces matter? Power affects who feels safe and who carries risks. For example, if security depends on a few people, whether the IT expert, the women doing care work, or the most experienced members of the team, this helps create fragile points of failure. Why? Because if these people burn out, or leave, or are targeted, the whole group turns out to be more vulnerable because first, they are the most experienced, and secondly, they are the ones who hold the power. Building a true culture of security means noticing these dynamics, naming them, building capacity through training, and then redistributing responsibilities. What are the common dynamics? First, we have gender. For example, women taking on invisible emotional labor. In many activist spaces, women or gender diverse members often take on the emotional labor, like checking in on others, mediating conflict, or offering help. This is vital work, but it often goes unrecognized compared to visible leadership roles. Another aspect of common dynamics are the age and experience factor. Veteran or old activists sometimes dominate decision making, while younger members hesitate to challenge them. This can create blind spots and limit fresh ideas. Another common dynamic is tech knowledge. We often hear, for example, oh, ask the IT person. Technical experts become gatekeepers, sometimes unintentionally. This can disempower others and overload one person. Another aspect of a common dynamic is access and geography. In global and local coalitions, urban activists may have more resources, better internet connectivity, more visibility, while rural voices are sidelined. Similarly, language barriers can exclude people from crucial conversations. What is the impact of this? This leads to an unequal burden. It leads to silencing and or exclusion of the marginalized. What is our goal here? The goal is to move from hidden hierarchies to shared accountability and equity. So, just as security culture depends on shared agreements, communication, and care, it also depends on equity. That is, making sure responsibility isn't falling on a few shoulders and every team or community member feels empowered to speak up. Now, think for a moment. In your movement or community, who usually takes on the invisible work of keeping people safe? We're going to move on to how internal hierarchies shape risk, safety, and care. How does power shape risk? In unequal spaces, some people carry more exposure and more labor. They are more likely to be surveilled, harassed, or pushed to emotional burnout. And often, they are expected to do the emotional work of caring for others. If we don't name this, we reproduce harm even while trying to build safety. Power isn't always visible. Power shows up not only in formal roles like leadership or coordination, but also in informal ways. Whose voice is trusted? Who speaks most? Who holds knowledge? Let's also consider positionality. People's risk levels often depend on their identities. For example, a trans activist, a land defender from an indigenous community, a person with precarious immigration status. They don't just face more risks, they often get less protection. We therefore must be willing to examine how power shapes voice, safety, and vulnerability. Now we look at how addressing power helps to build safety. To build true collective security, we must identify and challenge the structures within our groups and not just the threats outside them. What does this mean? We have to make space to speak about power. We have to acknowledge discomfort without defensiveness. We have to use tools like power mapping or reflection on privilege. We have to shift visibility, voice, and risk across the group. When we do this, safety becomes more than policy, it becomes a shared commitment. We have explored the culture of security and how power dynamics shape our safety. Now let's ground these ideas in real life stories of resistance and risk prevention. These case studies are drawn from the global south, where activists have built creative, context specific responses to danger. Now, why do these case studies matter? There is deep wisdom in the experiences of grassroots defenders. These are not best practices from institutions, they are lived strategies created by people just like you and me, facing complex threats in under-resourced conditions. Each case shows a different approach to risk prevention, from digital security to land defense to care-based organizing. As we walk through them, I invite you to listen for practices you might adapt in your own work. The first case study we'll look at is a digital security case in Kenya. It comes from a youth-led LGBTQI rights collective in Nairobi. As they gained visibility through social media campaigns, they became targets of digital harassment, including doxing, fake accounts, and hacking attempts. Now, instead of retreating, they built a digital security culture. They switched from WhatsApp to Signal for internal communications. They created a shared protocol for digital risks, outlining steps to take in case of breaches. Every 6 months, they held community-led trainings where younger members taught each other about digital safety. This is a great example of proactive peer-supported prevention. Now we'll go to the next example, which is a community on land defense in Colombia. In rural Colombia, Afro-Colombian communities organizing to defend ancestral lands from illegal mining faced constant threats, armed intimidation, disappearances, and legal harassment. Their response was collective and grounded in cultural resistance. They used community mapping to record land boundaries and abuses. They formed rotating security circles, volunteers who conducted night patrols to monitor threats. They partnered with local radio stations to broadcast regular safety updates and organize rapid responses. This case shows how collective visibility, local tools, and cultural autonomy plays a role in protecting land and life. Now, the final case study is a feminist collective from the Philippines. Under the Duterte regime, many feminist and youth-led groups in the Philippines faced heightened surveillance and repression. One arts-based feminist collective developed a series of risk prevention strategies. They used pre-action checklists that included legal contact information, emotional readiness, and media preparedness. They paired up members as buddies who checked in on each other before and after events. For events or performances, they always had legal observers and pre-arranged exit plans in case of crackdowns. This is a beautiful example of how emotional care, preparation, and legal strategy can work together. Now, let's take a moment to reflect. Which story resonates most with our context? What stood out for us about how they prevented harm? What's one practice we could try in our own work? We are going to move on looking at collective tools and strategies. We've been exploring what security culture means in practice. Now, let's look at the collective tools and strategies that help movements not only survive but thrive. When we hear the word tools in the context of activism or security, what comes to mind? For many people, it's tech tools like apps, platforms, software, etc. But I would like us to broaden our understanding. In collective work, tools are not just technical solutions. They include our routines, roles, agreements, and behaviors. Anything at all we use together to reduce risks and increase safety. When we use tools collectively, they become part of our organizing culture, not just individual preferences. Security tools that only one or two people understand or use are not sustainable. What makes them powerful is when they are shared, normalized, and reinforced across the group. That's when they stop being just tools and start becoming practices that build trust, resilience, and collective power. In past sessions, we have shared resources, which we will look at briefly here. We have various categories of collective tools, and there are five key categories. The first one is documentation tools. Some of these tools are technical, others are relational or strategic. Most effective groups use a combination of them, often without even realizing they are practicing collective security. When we look at documentational tools, for example, organizing often involves storing sensitive information. So using encrypted drives, offline backups, or privacy-conscious cloud tools protects group knowledge. When we talk of emergency protocols, clear action plans for when something goes wrong, legal hotlines, body-up systems at protests, rapid response chats, and shared contacts are examples of this. When we look at digital safety tools, this include encrypted messaging, apps like Signal, password managers like Bitwarden, and tools for safety browsing like VPNs. These are crucial when facing surveillance or digital threats. There are a few practical group-wide digital safety tips that we could share. For example, use Signal instead of WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger, especially for planning your actions. Turn on disappearing messages by default in your Signal groups. Avoid password sharing via chat. Adapt to your threat model. If your group is in a high risk area or working on sensitive issues, the standard should be higher. But remember that the most secure platform is only helpful if everyone knows how to use it. So choose tools that your group can commit to and make time to teach and practice together. The next category is decision-making tools. These are tools that make participation more inclusive and transparent. Think of paths for collaborative writing, or encrypted pools to gather feedback safely. Finally, we have emotional and peer support tools. Security threats don't just come from the outside. Burnout, trauma, internal conflict, and fear can quietly weaken your group from within. That's why emotional tools are essential. Some of these may include peer check ins before or after actions, having safe words during a protest or meeting to indicate distress, designating an emotional support person or mental health ally for an event, ensuring that it is not always the same person, debriefing sessions where people can share how they were affected, not just what happened logistically. We also have to establish group norms around communication and accountability. We have to make emotional safety visible to be able to reduce harm so that you can build a culture where people speak up early before tensions boil over or fear leads to silence. When these tools are actively shared, practiced, and discussed, they stop being optional. They become part of how our groups function with more clarity, accountability, and care. Now, quickly, let's ask ourselves the question: which of these two categories is least developed in our various groups? Why might that be the case? Now, we're going to move on to look at core collective strategies. Now that we've talked about tools, let's look at the strategies that activate them. Tools on their own are not enough. Strategy is what determines whether your tools are useful in real life situations. Here are some foundational collective strategies that can help tools work better. The first thing is carrying out trainings and rotating responsibilities. Like tech hosts, note takers, or safety coordinators, this builds shared capacity and decentralizes power. We also have to hold regular security reflections. This could just be 15-minute agenda items where the group asks a few questions. What went well? What didn't? What needs tightening up? We also have creating onboarding flows. When new people join your teams, how do they learn about safety practices? It's important to document this and share. We also can simulate crisis. So just like a fire drill, for example, run through what happens if someone is arrested or a Zoom call is hijacked. It's low risk practice for high risk moments. Finally, we talk about developing collective agreements. These can include norms and communication, information sharing, emotional care, or behavior in public spaces. These strategies could turn your ideas about security into muscle memory. They help your group act fast, respond with care, and avoid confusion when it matters most. We're going to look at recapping what we have learned in a nutshell from tools to culture. It is imperative to return to something simple but powerful. Tools only matter if they live in the culture of your group. If security is something only the tech person knows or the team leader knows or talks about, it is going to fail. If it's something everyone practices, then we've built resilience, not just protection. We have to remember that every time we rotate a role, checking on someone's emotional state, or review our communication protocols, we are strengthening our collective armor. We have to remember that we do not need to underestimate the power of small changes. A shared document, for example, a 5-minute check in, a rotation rule, whatever it is, each one is a building block in the culture of safety and care. Thank you very much.
Before we close today's session, I want to remind you that you're not alone in this work. Protecting ourselves and our communities can feel overwhelming, but there are resources and people ready to support you. If you are a climate justice activist or any human rights defender and find yourself in urgent need of help, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can contact us directly through the email, Signal, or WhatsApp numbers displayed on this slide. Even if we might not be able to provide direct assistance, we can refer you to our trusted partners and networks who specialize in different kinds of support, whether it's legal aid, digital security help, psychosocial care, or emergency relocation. Your safety and well being matter deeply, so please bookmark these contacts and share them with your peers in need. Activism is a journey we take together. So remember, reaching out is a sign of strength.